My name is Frances Townsend, and I'm 22 years old. 2 weeks ago, I stood on a graduation stage in front of 3,000 people while my parents sat in the front row with faces so pale they looked frozen. They had come to watch my twin sister graduate from Whitmore University. They had no idea I was graduating too. They definitely didn't know I was the valedictorian. And they never imagined I would be the one standing behind the microphone giving the keynote speech. But this story didn't start at graduation. It started 4 years earlier, in my parents' living room, on a hot summer evening in 2021. That was the night my father looked me in the eyes and told me I wasn't worth investing in. The college letters arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Victoria got into Whitmore University, one of the most expensive private schools in the country. Tuition alone was $65,000 a year. I got into East Berks State University. It wasn't famous like Whitmore, but it was still a good school. My tuition would be $25,000 a year. That night, Dad called a family meeting. He sat in his leather chair like he was running a business meeting instead of talking to his daughters. Mom sat quietly on the couch. Victoria stood near the window smiling before the conversation even started. I sat across from Dad holding my acceptance letter so tightly the paper bent in my hands. Dad cleared his throat. "Victoria," he said, "your mother and I have decided to fully pay for your education at Whitmore. Tuition, housing, meals, everything." Victoria screamed happily. Mom smiled proudly. Dad looked at me next. "Frances," he said calmly, "we've decided not to fund your education." For a second, I honestly thought I heard him wrong. "What?" I whispered. Dad folded his hands. "Victoria has leadership potential. She networks well. She knows how to build connections. She'll have opportunities that justify the investment." Then he paused. The next words cut deeper than anything he had ever said before. "You're smart, Frances, but you're not special. There's no real return on investment with you." The room went completely silent. I looked at Mom. She wouldn't even look at me. I looked at Victoria. She was already texting someone, probably telling her friends about Whitmore. "So what am I supposed to do?" I asked. Dad shrugged. "You're resourceful. You'll figure something out." That night, I sat alone in my bedroom staring at the cracked ceiling. I didn't cry. I'd already cried too many times growing up in that house. Over birthdays where Victoria got expensive gifts while I got leftovers. Over family vacations where she got her own hotel room while I slept on couches. Over Christmas mornings where her pile of presents covered half the room while mine fit into one small bag. The favoritism had always been there. Everyone saw it. Nobody admitted it. When we turned 16, Victoria got a brand new Honda Civic with a giant red bow. I got her old laptop with a cracked screen and a battery that barely lasted 40 minutes. Mom said softly, "We can't afford 2 cars, sweetheart." But somehow they could afford Victoria's ski trips. Her designer prom dress. Her summer program in Spain. Family photos were the worst. Victoria always stood in the center glowing like the star of the family. I was usually near the edge. Sometimes half my body got cropped out. Like nobody noticed. Or maybe they noticed and just didn't care. One night when I was 17, I finally asked Mom the question I had been carrying for years. "Why do you treat us differently?" She sighed like I was being difficult. "Frances, you're imagining things. We love you both equally. But actions don't lie." A few months later, I accidentally found Mom's phone unlocked on the kitchen counter. A text conversation with Aunt Linda was open. I shouldn't have read it. But I did. "Poor Frances," Mom had written. "But Harold's right. She doesn't stand out. We have to be practical." I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. Then I quietly put the phone back down. That night changed something inside me. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I finally understood the truth. To my parents, I wasn't their daughter. I was a bad investment. So that same night, I opened my broken laptop and searched one thing. Full scholarships for independent students. The internet loaded slowly. But what I found changed my life forever. I spent the entire summer building a survival plan. I sat on my bedroom floor with a notebook, calculator, and cheap coffee from the gas station. Eastbrook would cost $100,000 over 4 years. My parents would contribute zero. My savings from part-time jobs were only $2,300. The numbers looked impossible. I had 3 choices. Give up. Take massive student loans. Or work myself nearly to death. I chose the third option. I found 3 jobs near campus. A morning shift at a coffee shop. Weekend cleaning work in dorm buildings. And hopefully a teaching assistant position later. I found the cheapest room I could rent. $300 a month. Tiny. No air conditioning. For roommates. But it was walking distance from campus. I wrote out my schedule. Wake up at 4 in the morning. Work at the cafe by 5. Classes from 9 to 5. Study until midnight. Sleep 4 hours. Repeat. Every single day. Meanwhile, Victoria spent the summer posting beach pictures from Cancun. Bright sunsets. Fancy restaurants. Laughing with friends. I packed thrift store blankets into a second-hand suitcase. Our lives were already moving in different directions. Before bed every night, I whispered the same sentence to myself. This is the price of freedom. Freedom from needing their approval. Freedom from begging to be seen. Freedom from believing their opinion decided my worth. Freshman year was brutal. There were nights I survived on instant ramen and vending machine snacks. Some weeks I barely slept. Thanksgiving came during my first semester. I stayed in my tiny rented room while almost everyone else went home. I called Mom that evening. In the background I heard dishes clinking and people laughing. Happy Thanksgiving, I said. Oh, yes, honey. Happy Thanksgiving. Her voice sounded distracted. Can I talk to Dad? A pause. Then I heard Dad's voice faintly in the background. Tell her I'm busy. The words hit me like ice water. Mom came back onto the phone. Your father's occupied right now. It's okay, I said quietly. She asked if I needed money. I looked around my tiny room. At the borrowed textbooks. At the noodles on my desk. At the blanket with holes near the edges. No, I said. I'm fine. After we hung up, I opened Facebook. The first thing I saw was Victoria's Thanksgiving picture. Mom. Dad. Victoria. 3 plates at the table. 3 chairs. Not 4. They hadn't even left a place for me. I stared at that photo for a long time. Something inside me finally broke. Not loudly. Quietly. The part of me still hoping they would suddenly become different people simply disappeared. And strangely, losing that hope made me stronger. Because once you stop waiting for love that never comes, you finally start building your own life. Second semester, I took microeconomics with Dr. Margaret Smith. Students were terrified of her. People said she never gave A's. I sat in the 3rd row every class taking perfect notes because I couldn't afford to fail anything. When she returned our first essay, I expected maybe a B. At the top of mine was an A+. Underneath she had written 3 words. See me after class. I thought I was in trouble. After class I walked to her desk nervously. Dr. Smith adjusted her glasses and looked directly at me. This essay, she said, is one of the best undergraduate papers I've read in years. I blinked. Thank you. Where did you study before Eastbrook? Public school. And your family? I hesitated. Then somehow everything spilled out. The favoritism. The rejection. The jobs. The exhaustion. The feeling of never being enough. Dr. Smith listened quietly. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. Have you heard of the Whitfield Scholarship? I saw it online, I said. But it's impossible. Nothing is impossible for the right student. I laughed nervously. 20 students nationwide. People like me don't win things like that. She looked at me carefully. Francis, your problem isn't ability. It's that nobody has ever shown you your value. Her voice softened. Let me help change that. From that moment on, everything shifted. Dr. Smith became the first adult in my life who truly saw me. The next 2 years became a blur of work and survival. I woke up before sunrise every day. I worked until my hands hurt. I studied until my vision blurred. While other students went to football games and parties, I stayed in the library. I built a perfect GPA one exhausting semester at a time. There were moments I nearly collapsed. Once I fainted during my coffee shop shift. The doctor said I was exhausted and dehydrated. I went back to work the next morning anyway. Another time I sat in my friend Rebecca's borrowed car and cried for 20 minutes straight. Not because something terrible had happened that day. Because everything terrible had been happening for years. Rebecca became my closest friend. She was loud, funny, dramatic, and completely incapable of minding her own business. Which honestly saved me. One Christmas, while everyone else went home, Rebecca showed up at my apartment with cheap hot chocolate and a tiny paper Christmas tree. This place is depressing, she announced. I know. So we're fixing it. We spent the evening decorating my tiny room with dollar store lights. It was the happiest Christmas I could remember. Junior year, Dr. Smith called me into her office. I'm nominating you for the Whitfield Scholarship. I stared at her. You're serious? Completely. The application process nearly destroyed me. 10 essays. Multiple interviews. Recommendation letters. Panels of professors asking impossible questions. At one point I was writing scholarship essays between cleaning dorm bathrooms. During all of this, Victoria texted me for the first time in months. Mom says you never come home anymore. That's kind of sad, honestly. I stared at the message. Then locked my phone and returned to my essay. The truth was simple. I couldn't afford to go home. But even if I could, I wasn't sure I wanted to. The final interview took place in New York. I checked my bank account before booking the trip. $847. The flight alone would cost almost half. I nearly gave up. Then Rebecca burst into my apartment after class. You got the final interview? She screamed. I nodded. You're going. I can't afford it. Yes, you can. Overnight bus ticket. $53. Done. I can't ask you for money. You didn't ask, she said. I'm forcing you. So I took an overnight bus to Manhattan. I arrived at 5 in the morning exhausted, stiff, and wearing a thrift store blazer. The waiting room terrified me. Every other student looked polished and confident. Expensive watches. Designer bags. Parents waiting nearby. I looked down at my worn shoes. I felt small. Then I remembered something Dr. Smith once told me. You don't need to belong in the room. You only need to prove you deserve to stay there. So I walked into that interview and told the truth. Not a perfect polished version. The real version. The lonely version. The exhausted version. 2 weeks later, I was walking to my morning shift when my phone buzzed. My heart started racing. Whitfield Scholarship decision. I stopped right there on the sidewalk. Hands shaking. Breathing hard. I opened the email. Dear Ms. Townsend. We are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as a Whitfield Scholar. I read it 4 times. Then I sat down on the curb and cried so hard strangers stared at me. 3 years of pressure exploded out of me all at once. I had done it. I had actually done it. That night Dr. Smith called. "I'm proud of you, Francis. Thank you for believing in me." "There's more," she said. The Whitfield Scholarship allowed students to transfer to partner universities for their final year. Whitmore University was on the list. Victoria's school. "If you transfer," Dr. Smith said carefully, "you'll graduate with top honors. And Whitfield scholars deliver the commencement speech." I went completely still. I thought about my parents sitting proudly in the audience for Victoria. Completely unaware that I would be there too. "I'm not doing this for revenge," I said. "I know," Dr. Smith replied softly. "I transferred that semester. And I told nobody." 3 weeks after arriving at Whitmore, I was studying in the library when I heard a familiar voice. "Oh my God. Francis?" I looked up. Victoria stood there frozen holding an iced coffee. Her mouth literally hung open. "What are you doing here?" "I'm a student here." "How?" "Mom and Dad never said." "They don't know." Victoria blinked repeatedly. "What do you mean they don't know?" "They don't know." She stared at me like I had become a completely different person. "But how are you paying for this?" "Scholarship." The word seemed to hit her physically. For the first time in years, she looked uncomfortable. Ashamed maybe. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked quietly. I closed my textbook. "Did you ever ask?" She opened her mouth. Then closed it again. I stood up. "I need to get to class." Before I could leave, she grabbed my arm. "Francis, do you hate us?" I looked at her carefully. At my twin sister. The girl who got everything. The girl who never noticed I had nothing. "No," I said calmly. "You can't hate people you stopped expecting things from." That night my phone exploded with calls. Mom. Dad. Victoria. I ignored all of them. The next morning Dad finally reached me. "Francis," he said stiffly, "Victoria tells me you transferred to Whitmore." "Yes." "You should have told us." "Why?" A pause. "Because you're our daughter." I almost laughed. "Am I?" Silence. "You told me I wasn't worth investing in. Remember?" Another silence. "I don't remember saying exactly that." "I do." The words came out calm. That seemed to upset him more. "We should discuss this in person at graduation," he finally said. "I'll see you there." Then I hung up. The months before graduation felt strangely peaceful. For once, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I already knew who I was. Rebecca drove up for graduation weekend. She helped me choose a navy blue dress. "You look terrifyingly successful," she announced. "I feel like I'm going to faint." That means it's important. The night before graduation, I barely slept. Not because I was nervous about the speech. Because I kept wondering what I would feel seeing my family again. Anger? Sadness? Satisfaction? But around 3 in the morning, I finally realized the truth. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted freedom. Graduation morning arrived bright and warm. Whitmore Stadium held 3,000 people. Families filled the seats carrying flowers, balloons, cameras, and signs. I entered quietly through the faculty entrance. My graduation robe looked mostly normal. Except for the gold valedictorian sash across my shoulders. And the Whitfield Scholar medallion pinned near my chest. I sat in the front honors section near the stage. 20 feet away, Victoria laughed with her friends taking selfies. She still didn't know about the speech. Then I looked into the audience. Front row. Best seats in the stadium. Mom and Dad. Dad wore his expensive navy suit. Mom held a giant bouquet of roses. Between them sat an empty chair. Not for me. Probably for bags and coats. I stared at it longer than I should have. Dad adjusted his camera lens carefully, ready for Victoria's big moment. Neither of them had noticed me yet. The ceremony began. Speeches. Applause. Music. My heartbeat grew louder with every minute. Finally, the university president returned to the microphone. And now, he announced, it is my honor to introduce this year's Valedictorian and Whitfield Scholar. A student who has shown extraordinary resilience, excellence, and determination. Mom leaned toward Dad smiling. Dad lifted his camera toward Victoria. Please welcome Frances Townsend. Everything stopped. Dad froze completely. Mom's bouquet slipped sideways. Victoria turned toward the stage so fast her graduation cap tilted. I stood slowly. 3,000 people applauded. I walked toward the podium. My heels clicked against the stage floor. The gold sash moved across my shoulders. And in the front row, my parents stared at me like they were seeing a ghost. Confusion. Recognition. Shock. Then complete silence. For the first time in my life, they were truly looking at me. I adjusted the microphone. Good morning, everyone. My voice sounded calm. Stronger than I felt. For years ago, someone told me I wasn't worth the investment. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad's camera lowered slowly. The entire stadium went silent. I was told to expect less from my future because others expected less from me. I looked across the crowd. At first, that pain nearly destroyed me. I spoke about exhaustion. About working 3 jobs. About studying until midnight. About instant noodles and second-hand textbooks. About loneliness. About believing for years that love had to be earned. I kept waiting for someone else to decide I mattered, I said. Then one day I realized something important. I paused. The people around you do not define your value. The stadium stayed completely still. I stopped trying to prove other people wrong. I started proving myself right. I never mentioned my parents by name. I didn't need to. The truth was already sitting in the front row. The greatest gift I ever received was not money. It was the chance to discover who I was without anyone's approval. Mom was crying openly now. Dad looked completely shattered. To anyone who has ever been overlooked, underestimated, or ignored, I said softly, "You are enough. You always were." Then the applause exploded. 3,000 people rose to their feet. A standing ovation. The sound hit me like a wave. I stepped away from the microphone feeling strangely calm. Not victorious. Free. At the reception afterward, my parents approached me slowly through the crowd. Dad reached me first. "Frances," he said hoarsely, "why didn't you tell us?" I took a sip of sparkling water. "Did you ever ask?" He looked like I had slapped him. Mom stepped closer. "We're so sorry," she whispered. "We didn't know." "You knew enough," I replied quietly. Dad shook his head. "I made mistakes. You made choices." The words landed hard. He swallowed. "I was wrong." "Yes," I said. "You were." Mom reached for my hand. I stepped back. Not angrily. Just honestly. "I'm not trying to punish you," I said. "But I'm not the same person who left home 4 years ago." Dad looked completely lost. "What do you want from us?" I thought carefully before answering. "Nothing." His face fell. "That's the problem," I continued. "I don't need anything from you anymore." For the first time in my life, my father looked small. Then James Whitfield III approached and shook my hand. "Outstanding speech, Miss Townsend. The foundation is proud of you." My parents watched silently while one of the most respected men in the country praised the daughter they once dismissed. I saw the realization hit them fully. They hadn't just ignored me. They had completely misunderstood me. Mom started crying harder. Please come home this summer, she begged. No, I said gently. I have a job in New York. Dad stared at me. You're cutting us off? I'm setting boundaries. There was a difference. Victoria finally stepped closer. She looked nervous. Congratulations, she whispered. Thank you. I'm sorry, she said quietly. For not noticing. I looked at her for a long moment. Then nodded. We'll talk sometime. And I meant it. I walked away from them slowly. Not running. Not escaping. Just moving forward. Dr. Smith waited near the exit smiling proudly. You did well, she said. I looked back one final time at my family standing frozen in the crowd. I'm free, I whispered. And for the first time in my life, it was true. The fallout started immediately. Family friends asked my parents why they had never mentioned my scholarship. Dad's business partners praised my speech online. People called me inspiring. Resilient. Extraordinary. My parents suddenly had to face the truth publicly. Not that I succeeded. That I succeeded without them. A few days later Victoria called me. Mom cries constantly, she admitted. Dad barely talks anymore. I stayed quiet. Francis, she whispered, I really am sorry. I know. How do we fix this? We don't fix the past, I said. We decide what happens next. 2 months later, I moved into a tiny studio apartment in Manhattan. The kitchen was barely bigger than a closet. The window faced a brick wall. But it was mine. Completely mine. I started working at a financial consulting firm. Long hours. Hard work. I loved every second. One evening I found a handwritten letter from Mom in my mailbox. 3 pages long. She admitted everything. The favoritism. The excuses. The years she stayed silent because it was easier. She wrote that watching me on that stage felt like meeting a stranger who somehow was still her daughter. I read the letter twice. Then carefully folded it and placed it in my desk drawer. I didn't answer immediately. For once, the decision belonged to me. 6 months after graduation, Dad called. I almost ignored it. But something made me answer. His voice sounded older. Smaller. I was wrong, he said immediately. No excuses. No defending himself. Just the truth. I failed you as a father. I stayed silent listening to him breathe. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted. It's not my job to teach you, I replied. You're right. Another pause. But if you're willing, I said slowly, we can try having real conversations. He sounded shocked. You'd give me that chance? I'm not promising forgiveness, I said. But I'm willing to see if something honest can exist between us. He cried quietly. I had never heard my father cry before. 2 years have passed since that graduation. I still live in New York. I've been promoted twice. My company is paying for my MBA. Sometimes I still think about the girl sitting alone in that tiny rented room eating instant noodles while her family celebrated holidays without her. I carry her with me everywhere. Because she survived. Victoria and I meet for coffee once a month now. It's awkward sometimes. We're learning how to be sisters as adults because we never really learned as children. One afternoon she looked at me sadly and asked, "How do you not hate me?" I thought about it carefully. Because you didn't create the system, I said. You just benefited from it. Last month my parents visited my apartment in New York. Mom cried the second she walked inside. Dad apologized at least 5 times. Nothing magically healed. We're still broken in many ways. But at least now the truth exists in the open. And honestly? That matters. A few months ago I donated $10,000 anonymously to Eastbrook Scholarship Fund for students without family support. When I told Rebecca, she burst into tears. You're changing someone's life, she said. I smiled. Someone changed mine first. For a long time, I thought my parents' approval was the prize waiting at the finish line. I thought if I worked hard enough, achieved enough, suffered enough, they would finally see me. But I learned something different. You cannot force people to love you correctly. You cannot earn basic kindness. And you cannot spend your whole life waiting for someone else to decide your worth. At some point, you have to decide it yourself. My parents' rejection hurt me deeply. Some days it still does. I don't think pain like that disappears completely. But it no longer controls me. Because now I understand something important. My worth was never connected to whether they could see it. It existed long before they finally opened their eyes. If you're listening to my story right now and you've ever felt invisible in your own family, I need you to hear this. You are not difficult to love. You are not less valuable because someone failed to appreciate you. And you do not need permission to believe in yourself. Protect your peace. Set boundaries. Build your own future. And never let someone else decide what your life is worth. Because if a girl once called not worth the investment could stand on a stage in front of 3,000 people as a Whitfield scholar and valedictorian, then you can survive too. You can rise too. And one day, you'll finally look in the mirror and realize something beautiful. You were enough all along. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories like this. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place?